So thank you very much for invitation and for this kind presentation. And it's really a great honor for me to be part of your international projects. I hope that it's only a seed that will grow in the future. And we as a University of Nicolaus Copernicus, we are really interested in future cooperation, in creating a red in which we could go deeper in many aspects related to science-religion debate. So my presentation is concentrated on the perspective of theologian, because I think that frequently we deal with issue why science should be open to religious claims, or how science can benefit with this openness to to theological tradition. But today I would like to invite to make this question, why theologians should be interested in science, and what kind of theology of science we need in our theological work. So I will claim for a science-friendly theology, let's call in this way, this kind of theology that we need nowadays. And perhaps as a Thomist, and I'm sure you will see my Thomistic approach in many aspects during this presentation, I will say, using the very famous formula that we know in theological tradition, that extra scientiam nulla theologia. So there is no theology outside science. So there is no option to do theology without this relationship to science. Perhaps what remain is this image of war between science and religion. Perhaps we note this more in our countries in the East Europe after the communist time, this post-Sovietic elite mentality and this dialectic approach that or science or religion. And I think that the correct attitude is more and science and religion. So we know this because even if we look at different maps, we realize that one map is not able to express the whole reality. One map can say something about reality, but this is only an aspect. The question is, theology can create its own map and be one map of others, or is something different? I will claim that theology is not using its own map. It's using all available maps, but is able to read this map from very particular perspective. So it's a manner of contemplating the world, as Thomas Aquinas said, sub ratione Dei, so in the light of God, looking at the same reality, but from this different perspective. Of course, this is something that was present in the history, because if we look at the scheme that was prepared by Ted Peters from Berkeley in his article on science and religion, we have these 10 main models of relationship between science and religion. And from these 10 models, only 4 are with this, let's call, conflict character between science and religion. And 6 are in the complementary approach, like the 2 books, 2 languages, science and religion as 2 different manner of speaking about the world, ethical alliance, dialogue leading to creative mutual interaction, naturalism, or theology of nature. Of course, we have 4 attitudes with more critical character, but it's not the only way how to perceive this mutual relation. So if for most of history, it was not the war metaphors that shaped the relationship between theology and science, then understanding the reason why theology should be interested in the result of science may be crucial in regaining the symbiosis between them. The linguistic differences and the way of thinking that slowly led to the distance between them in modern science, I think, are not a sufficient reason for this situation to persist. Perhaps the lack of motivation on the part of theologians who didn't see inspiration in the scientific discoveries, but many times they saw only a problem, as in the case of Galileo, for instance, played this attitude a greater role here and prompted to look in a different direction in search of support in modern times. Theology was looking for support mainly in poetry or literature, not in science itself. So in this way, the faith in modern times was built about the lack of contact between theology and science, treating the science as irrelevant addition or only apologetic a confirmation of theological claims, but building a kind of pure theology, by which I mean theology with no reference to any science, is a significant modification of the classical approach in which interest in the created world is not an option, but a condition for theological discourse. And yet, as Henri Granville saw, Christians have always wanted to incorporate the greatest achievements of natural science of his time into an understanding of God's workings in the world, namely emphasizing different approach to reality. The natural world was interesting for theologians who, like St. Thomas Aquinas and many scholastics, reflected on the nature, human being, and God relationships. And it was only later that it was reduced, their interest was reduced to the issue between human being and God, ignoring the nature. If so, why there was the practice of many modern theologians to develop theology in opposition to scientific discourse, forgetting its character as a discourse open to better explanation. So the question is why in theology so much distrust towards science? Although general formulation are always prone to inaccuracies, undoubtedly a cursory attention to the theological literature that is emerging reveals certain trends. The belief in the armistice between science and religion, which resulted in parallel development of both disciplines, interacting only from time to time, usually in the matter of some particular dispute. This state of affairs can be diagnosed from both perspectives. And I think what is now needed is to see in different perspective and to refresh not only historical discourse problems on the field of science and theology, but to reflect on the theology itself. Because I think that the theology in the modern time experienced a specific modification. It was not, in modern times, theology perceived as it was in the times of St. Thomas Aquinas, when it was a knowledge of principia, as Aquinas suggests. So about a specific way of looking at reality. Theology is providing principia, a key to look at the reality. I think like in a musical metaphor, we have the same note, but if you use different key, you have different melody. So the methodological problem is to use correct key to see and to listen the melody that was intended by the creator, composer. Now, theology is a kind of knowledge, science in this way, of using a correct key. Theology in modern times was transformed into knowledge of conclusions. So this is the crucial point, in my opinion. So it's not theology, established doctrine that should be defended. This is the modern concept of theology. The scholastic concept, and classical in some sense, is to see theology as an attitude or approach to reality sub ratione Dei. I will insist in this Latin formula, which is really very insightful and useful in the science-religion dialogue, because in this way we can re-establish the broken pact, alliance with nature. So why we should be interested in science? Because in this way we are also providing this new relationship with created world, to reconcile all creation in Christ, as we know it was the idea expressed in the letter of St. Paul. The problem of for the science-theology relationship is the perception of science in a static, also as a static body of knowledge, with which faith enters into relationships. On the contrary, we are dealing with very dynamic and changing whole. Science is discovering this relation to nature. So changing whole, dependent on many contexts and times, trying to reflect on complexities, characteristics of reality. Nevertheless, it seems that theologians often don't see the achievements of modern science and don't reflect on its meaning. The problem for theologians then is not prejudices against science itself, but the lack of a map to be aware of its achievements. Therefore, it's not about the relationship between science and theology, what models of interactions exist, but about the very process of assimilation of scientific data into theological reflection. And reflecting on this, Neil Messer, you can see on the slide his new book, noticed that this relation between science and religion could be organized in 5 models, the main criterion for which would be the degree to which they are included, science included in the theological reflection from maximum to minimum. On the first level, there is a complete domination of science, what we call scientism, excluding the meaningfulness of any theological statements. On the second level, science becomes the normative factor, making theology a dependent variable. On the third level, theology plays a greater role in equal position to science. So there is a dialogue between both positions. On the fourth level, theology takes a critical stance towards science. And on the fifth level, it takes on the role completely independent of science. So many claims that we find in recent literature about religion and science, we can locate on this scale of Messer. Of course, in the history, we have some example of how to make this theology of science. I would like to mention 3 propositions. First, related to Thomas Aquinas, scholastic thinkers, in which science is seen as a meaningful endeavor, and to underline our position as human being, in which we go to intelligibilia, so to the intellectual truth, only through something sensible, through our senses. So the contact with material world is necessary for us to gain a true knowledge of creation. But if we don't have this clear image, if we make errors in our description of creation, this is something also that affects our theological work. In this way, Aquinas, in the second book of the Summa Contra Gentiles, was mentioning several reasons why theologian should be interested in science in order to contemplate the wisdom of creatures and creator, and in order to be able to give thanks to God for creating the world. So many reasons from theological perspective, and error in science is affecting the theology. So this is very important point for Aquinas, not to build theology as independent from another knowledges, but to see theology as a science that is looking at reality from top down. Let's use this, this metaphor. Of course, recently, the very famous was the proposal of Father Michał Heller, and he insisted in a necessity to build a theology of science. And I think that in his idea was to concentrate mainly in theology of creation. That's the important field for theology of science, to understand better what does it mean to be created. And he listed three aspects of this possible theology of science. First, this is the reflection on contingency of creation. We are not necessary beings, so why we are on this world, and what's the reason of our presence here? Contingency is calling to be explained. We should give some reasons why there is at all and not nothing. And this is a point that science and religion meet each other. The second is the value of the word. And this is also important as a condition for any science. So science should be seen as something worthy to be done. In this sense, science needs values, and why we have such a situation in the world, that something is worthy to be achieved and realized. And the third point for Heller is intelligibility of the word. So why this word is possible to be interpreted, to be understood, to make a holistic approach to this reality. He put all this idea in his book, New Physics and New Theology, but his important claims is to build this image of science and religion in compatibility with achievements of contemporary physics. But let me focus in my presentation of the third proposal, very recent, of Javier Sánchez Canizares. In his book, Universo Singular, Sánchez Canizares points out other challenges to theology and philosophy, placing at the center the notion of nature, which in theology is usually assumed in a very static way. This is largely due to adherence to the mechanistic model that made God the supreme idea or principle of the functioning of the world, weakening his transcendence. Meanwhile, modern physics and other sciences operate with a dynamic model that doesn't pose a threat to theology, but opens up new perspectives for it, restoring the classical understanding associated with the becoming of being, according to what it is, and not developing it in isolation from nature. Sánchez Canizares emphasizes that by taking an interest in the image of nature arising from modern science, theology can purify the image of God, preserved in irreversion, and today incompatible with the description of the world. What is needed is a better understanding of situation of creation, the sense of being a creature as a relationship of dependence of the creator, and its dynamics, natural selection, thanks to which the perception of God will be de-infantilized. Science admitted to theology as a dialogue partner and not a scientist hegemon can help in the next stage of an disenchantment cycle. That's this time the mythological or magical understanding of God. The Spanish philosopher points out that the relationship between science and theology is not between the same corpus of science is now treated differently than in past time. In past, there was a domination of hierarchical model in which one science was one person was looking for the most important science. So one science was more important than other. And the question was, what's the most important science? Is mathematics, is philosophy, is biology, and depends in each century on this answer. It provoke a different approach to science and perceiving the relation to religion. But what now is in use in science is different model. It's a model of network in which the most important is not hierarchical, the levels of importance, but the connection to each other. So to understand science is to be in relation to another science, not to be excluded from this perspective. So the net model or network is here the crucial. And going to the conclusion, and as a part of developed theology of science, which focuses especially on the consideration of the concept of creation, it's worth strengthening the reflection of the importance of science as such for theological discourse. Such treatment is really necessary for renewal of the same theological work discipline in line with hermeneutical unity proposed by scholastic tradition, in which the achievements of science are really present in dialogue with religion, playing a critical role, and at the same time perceiving himself not so much as a reviewer of other science. It's not the role of theology to be reviewer of all the arbiter of other science, but as an architect building one project from all available sources, although using different perspective. The key will be to depart from the hierarchical perception of science in favor of this new model of network of relations. And that's the meaning of my proposed formula, extra scientiam nulla theologia. So theology doesn't exist to develop its own independent knowledge of God. The theology is not identical with scientia divina, but is a way of contemplating the created world, the result of God's loving decision, through the prism of the Creator, supratione Dei. Over the course of the history of the relationship between science and theology, many models of interactions have emerged. But I think that we can, at the end, look at the biblical story about biblical magi from the East going for Bethlehem to adorate newborn Jesus. Their work was initiated thanks to the observing the world. So thanks to science, we can say. In Jerusalem, they got to know the Old Testament prophecies. So it was a contact with religion in their scientific endeavor. But the last kilometers from Jerusalem to Bethlehem, they are guided by both Holy Scripture and nature. So they saw a start, as we can read in the biblical text, and they were very happy because, I think, it's because these both orders agreed. I think that's what they enjoy, this amazing consonance, the unity of the world, the unity of both stories, biblical and natural, scientific, this kind of reconciliation in this sense. And let me finish my presentation with this show presentation of the journal that we are editing at our university Copernicus University, together with research group CRIF at University of Navarra, Scientia et Fides, as it was pronounced at the beginning in the presentation of my activities. I think the most important part in this title is this et. That is why it's in red, just to look for these approaches in which science and religion, science and faith are interacting. So I'd like to invite you to cooperate in this journal, to read articles, to give your opinion about these topics that we are trying to put into discussion in the science. Thank you very much for your attention.
And thank you, Professor Piotr Roszak. Now we have time for questions, answers. You've been able to connect the early Christian and Thomistic, very serious approach to science. Yesterday we saw how Professor Petros Vassiliadis reminded us how Basil the Great, when he interpreted the world in his 6 days of creation, he used the available scientific data, and then that's how he proceeded. And Thomas Aquinas, of course, laid the foundation for modern sciences. That is very often underappreciated and sometimes overlooked, that the project of scholasticism, with accumulation of knowledge and the libraries and the encyclopedia that were produced in those times, then enabled the spring of different fields. So,
yeah, let me just to say that I think it's true that we can back to scholastic proposal because it was a systemic thought. So like a summa, no? It's not to organize our faith only in isolation to another discipline. No, it's important to offer a whole picture. And this picture is bigger than our capacity to describe it. So this is the paradox of Thomism and all Christian, I think, theology, that we try to describe something that is bigger. And this, but this endeavor, this effort is really valuable. And Aquinas is a good teacher and how to assimilate good science. Aristotle was not a Christian philosopher, right? So it's also significant that he was able to include all available sources of data, of knowledge. And faith is not to choose one, but to have one and another.
Thank you. So any questions? If you'd like to raise them, please write them in Ukrainian or in English as you wish. I will summarize them and interpret it if it's necessary. As people are still thinking about it, if I may just start this panel.
Yeah, please.
My question to you, to your field of research, is this something that you personally are investigating in your research on finding the method of interpreting, I don't know, reality, or is there a particular, I don't know, team that you are currently working? So my question is between method and application, so to say. If you could briefly share your own interests.
I just mentioned in my presentation that I think that the question of method is really crucial, and we should understand better our own theological method, not in the ideological key as something to defend established doctrine, but we can learn from Aquinas and other teachers, philosophers and theologians, that we need this key, like in the music, so the correct key. And here we know that debate is on how to approach to reality. We have different approaches from top down or bottom up. And this is not to choose one and to refuse another one. Is to try to coordinate both perspectives. So I think this is the message of the famous Fides et Ratio of John Paul II. Just there is no so the science needs some assumption, and that is why to understand better science, it can help to develop correctly, profoundly our theological work. So methodology, I think we can start to analyze in different tradition. But to know better what doesn't mean to make theology, so to look at the reality supratione Dei, mean that I should be interested in reality. So I think this is the challenge for theology today. It's not only, it's a crisis of theology in some sense, I think. That this is a challenge, but also crisis. But we were in the situation of the modern times where was the theology understood differently, as I said, the knowledge of conclusion. So the result was interesting to defend the sentence. And when we look at the Summa, it's really strange that Aquinas is sometimes defending very provocative sentences, just saying, okay, this is not true from this angle, but if we read this sentence from this perspective, it's true. I think it's invitation to find a way in dialogue with science how to show a Christian proposal as a holistic approach to reality, attractive, and a fundament of science. I think that Alistair McGrath is always recording this aspect that Christianity has something to offer to the modern science as a condition of how to do a good science, and this intelligibility of the word, the value of the word. So what kind of word we expect when we believe in God who is Logos? It should be something open to our understanding. So if we look at our faith in this way, I think we can gain a fresh perspective on this.
Thank you. I will summarize the question and answer, so please be patient with me. Моє питання до професора Рошака було щодо його особистих наукових зацікавлень. Так? Тобто, чи він насправді більше досліджує саму методологію, так, чи якесь застосування цієї методології до пізнання реальності. Так? Це велике питання, так, що навколо нас оточує. І відповідь була така, що так, дуже важливим є питання доброго, правильного методу, так, методологічного підходу. Так? Очевидно, що є підходи знизу, тобто від реальності до методу. Є інший підхід, це є від методу до реальності. Я думаю, тобто професор Рошак вважає, що потрібно враховувати всі аспекти, як це свого часу дуже збалансовано представив в своїй енцикліці Іван Павло II Fides et Ratio, так, і також, власне, Тома Аквінський є, знову ж таки, досить цікавим в даному випадку, тому що в своїй сумі він допускає різні перспективи. Так? Тобто пізніше він може і задавати якісь свої остаточні відповіді, але він дозволяє, власне, послухати, вислухати кожен голос, пізніше їх ввести в певний діалог. І як також ми вчора чули від професора Алістера Макгрефа, що християнство насправді має що запропонувати сучасній науці, принаймні з точки зору, власне, певного якогось орієнтування, моральних цінностей, так, і якихось глибших сенсів реальності. Так, і з іншого боку, нам, християнам, чи, скажімо, богословам, теж є виклик, що ми часом буває, що ховаємося від реальності. Нам, можливо, комфортніше перебувати на своїх теоретичних рівнях. Але наука нам допомагає вернутися до світу, який нас оточує. So thank you. And I see here another question from Professor Vassiliadis. Self-critical question for us Orthodox. Should we avoid the opposition to Thomas? is Basil the Great used the science in his age, can we also accept the similar approach of Aquinas and find a common point of reference? This is a question for Orthodox College of Theologians. I'm sure today there is a greater interest in modern philosophy and modern science from the contemporary Greek theologians. But would you like to reflect?
Just only one short reflection, because recently it calls my attention a lot of books or articles on Orthodox reading of Aquinas. So for me, it's also a great opportunity to know the Orthodox tradition or reception of Aquinas. Even recently was published a handbook of reception of Aquinas, of Thomism in general. So I think it's a good idea to reestablish this lost link, probably, and to learn more from Greek fathers. I was studying recently the use of Greek fathers by Thomas Aquinas, and it's really insightful how he was in his mentality, Aquinas very familiar to Greek fathers. So it's a nice option, I think. Yeah, thank you.
Now I will translate that into Ukrainian, if you allow me. Отже, прозвучало дуже гарне, цікаве питання від нашого професора Василіадіса. Це не так, як питання, як певна якась самокритична рефлексія, так? Чи ми, скажімо, багато з православних богословів не мали би позбутися цієї опозиції до томізму, так? Все-таки свого часу Василій Великий використовував науку свого часу, чи нам необхідно би було так прийняти подібний підхід, який, скажімо, використав пізніше Тома Аквінський, і щоб знаходити ці такі спільні точки дотику. І відповіддю професора Рошака була та, що насправді так, хочеться ніби питання до східних богословів, до православних богословів, але так, як ремарка, з'являється все більше і більше цікавих досліджень саме православних богословів, спадщини Томи Аквінського. Тому є певна якась зміна риторики, зміна методології серед сучасних богословів. Я особисто також спостерігаю все більше і більше досліджень, так, які будують мости з наукою, так, і насправді є також цікаві тепер дослідження, як сам Тома Аквінський використовував не лише Арістотеля, але також і грецьких отців церкви. Так, він завжди посилається і на Іоанна Дамаскина, і на Іоанна Златоустого, тобто на такі великі, важливі Діонісія Ареопагіта. Так, це для нього дуже такий щедрий матеріал, яким він користується. I'm looking at the clock, and this is a very interesting discussion, conversation that we have now. If there was one more question, we could probably take it, but the coffee break is pressing, so this is already a little bit over time. Dear Piotr Roszak and everyone present here, I would like to express my gratitude to your participation, to your paper, to your questions and answers. And let's take a break. I will give a word back to Roman Zawisky for perhaps a few housekeeping questions, and then we will resume shortly.
Yeah, thank you very much. Very grateful again for our two presenters this morning for this plenary session. After the break, we'll have two parallel sessions as advertised in the program.